After more than 6 years of negotiation, more than a dozen countries in the Asia-Pacific are now aiming to sign what will be the world's largest trade agreement in 2020, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or RCEP, also known as RCEP. Last week, the Chinese Ministry of Commerce said 15 member states have undertaken legal scrubbing, the final stage before its formal signing. Accounting for nearly a third of global GDP, how will RCEP reshape regional and global trade? Before we get down to discussion with our panelists from different countries, take a look at this first.
An emerging mega trade deal among 15 Asia-Pacific countries will be a game-changer for closer economic integration. RCEP is crossing its last hurdle, with officials aiming to sign the agreement in February or March 2020. The Chinese Ministry of Commerce said that the 15 economies had concluded text-based negotiations for all 20 chapters.
We noted 15 RCEP participating countries have concluded text-based negotiations for all 20 chapters and essentially all their market access issues, and tasked legal review and correction to commence for signing in 2020.
Together, the 15 countries make up close to one-third of the world population and the world's GDP. That's larger than the other regional trading blocs such as the European Union and the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or USMCA. Backing the trade deal, Chinese Premier Li Keqiang has urged Asian cooperation against global instability. But despite progress made in the negotiations, India is holding out for better terms. The mega deal started with 16 countries, but India opted against the trade pact over concerns that it would hurt its domestic producers. Negotiators from China and 10 ASEAN countries, as well as Japan, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand, are pressing ahead while leaving the door open for India. It's hoped cutting tariffs under the agreement would lower prices for trade while boosting competitiveness and exports for the world's largest trading bloc, with Asia at its center.
For more on the future of RCEP, let's turn to our panelists. In New Delhi, we have Dipankar Banerjee, Senior Strategic Consultant and former Director and Head of the Institute of Peace and Conflict Studies. In Kuala Lumpur, we are joined by Dr. Azmi Hassan, a Senior Political Analyst. In Beijing, last but not least, Ms. Rong Ying, Vice President of CIIS, which is the China Institute of International Studies. Gentlemen, welcome to our program. Now, Mr. Rong, how much potential are we seeing in reaching a real final deal regarding RCEP, as earlier we have some bumpy road, shall I say it that way, with India apparently trying to withdraw?
Well, of course, yes, this is a big event for a regional trade arrangement, and certainly if we had India on the board, that would be even great. But even without India, I think so far, which is a question mark, I think RCEP is going to be a big and the largest, actually, the trading bloc, as we known, that would bring ASEAN, would bring Japan, bring China, and others together. That it is a very, I think, important message, positive message as a world.
I see.
Undergoing a lot of uncertainties, and that shows ASEAN as a whole, it can play a role in bringing these differences together, but they also, I think, China and others that are working together to make sure that the region as a whole will work together.
I see. Mr. Hassan, as we know, the RCEP was being discussed under a very different situation this time. Apparently, on December the 10th, the appellate body of the World Trade Organization already paralyzed as a result of new judge being appointed to satisfy the daily operation of the body. Therefore, the teeth of WTO has so far apparently lost. So, Dr. Hassan, at this point, would the economies, as we mentioned earlier, be able to bring out an option for the region and the world? What is your assessment?
Yeah, I concur with you that WTO, I think, having problem trying to pull out its own trade rules. And I think with the conclusion of RCEP, hopefully January or coming this February, it can show to the world that with a diverse country in RCEP, we have developing countries, we have developed countries, and we have superpowers like China and Japan and South Korea. We can work together with the background of US-China trade war, where US in particular has been embarking a unilateral decision, or as they say right now, it's a protectionism. I think RCEP is a big deal. It shows to the world that a deal can be reached, even though at the beginning of the discussion, there are a lot of problems. But up until today, I think 90%, 95% of the problems have been solved.
Mr. Hassan, if I could just follow up very briefly, do you think economies remain optimistic under the current circumstances about a potential RCEP?
Yes, I'm very optimistic, for example, because, I say that there are a lot of differences, not only in terms of scale of economy within the 15 nations, but also the political ideology, political system are very different for a country in the 15 RCEP, but they can come together and agree. The main problem is that, or the main good thing about RCEP is that they start from the lower benchmark. I think that's very different from CPTPP or from WTO rules. That's the reason I said I'm very, very optimistic that RCEP can show how the world can conduct trade in the future.
Mr. Banerjee from India, I'm not here to isolate you in terms of a question, but rather to ask sincerely, what are some of the concerns of India so far? Because apparently, according even to the spokesperson of China's Commerce Ministry, other economies are also trying to work with India in order to put out a possibility to involve all kinds of parties within the earlier discussion round of RCEP. So, Mr. Banerjee, to what extent do you think India should join the overall discussion and possibly a discussion leading to a great result?
I want to assure of the panelists as well as your larger audience around the world that India is positive regarding joining the RCEP. India believes in free trade agreements, and it entered into this dialogue last 6 years ago in a very positive outlook. India looks towards the East, the Far East and Ulk East policy, foreign policy of India, and so therefore India, RCEP is an important treaty for India. But, of course, as with all treaties, there are issues that have to be discussed, resolved, and especially on treaties on trade, free trade agreement, there are vital issues which affect the domestic constituents, their economic development, and the whole nation's future progress. So, India has certain concerns, and therefore these concerns are being actively discussed. It is not closed. India will come into the RCEP discussion whenever conditions improve or there is encouragement that some of the concerns of India are being addressed, and India remains bullish regarding the treaty.
Okay. Yeah.
However, and of course one must accept that RCEP is going to be a very major free trade agreement, but without India it will not be as substantive as it ought to be.
Of course, if RCEP does not have India join, it will also be a loss for India, many would argue, if there were an RCEP for the future. Mr. Rong, I want to come back to you and Mr. Hassan as well. Now, both of you are coming from countries that are enthusiastic about an RCEP, even for the current stage. So, without earlier described to the public clearly what the concerns are specifically from India. Mr. Rong, to what extent do you think the other economies will try to incorporate and address all the concerns from the economy of India?
I think certainly other economies, including China, understand the concerns or the difficulties facing India. And not only, I think, economically and also politically, as we have seen after the decision was made, there's a kind of a debate on the one hand, but it also means a lot of sort of praise to the Modi, Prime Minister Modi. So it's becoming very much politicized an issue. But as far as the negotiation goes, even though I think the community, the leaders at the community agreed that they would work together to address the concern, but any negotiation has to be based on fair and terms. So I think certainly the other 15 members will continue to work with Indian colleagues in the hope that their concern will be addressed. But I would also say that, to be fair, India will also have to work hard to play its role.
Yeah. Mr. Hassan, now RCEP very much has been a strong role played by ASEAN countries, and now you yourself is coming from one of those important ASEAN economies. So how do you think about the quote-unquote concerns, and what do you make of the consensus already being reached so far regarding the importance of RCEP, whether it's just about trade, it's also about other aspects that we have to deal with all at the same time, if you look at the world politics now?
The problem with ASEAN that we have an ASEAN economic community, but that cannot be achieved 100% because of the disparity between the 10-nation ASEAN. I think that's a big issue now. Now with RCEP, we have China, Japan, South Korea as a big and superpower in economy, and also Vietnam recently has concluded their free trade agreement with EU. And I think if we combine it together, I think RCEP have been very accommodating with ASEAN, especially countries such as Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam, where they are more developing status. And I think some say that RCEP, China will benefit most. I don't agree with that. I think ASEAN too can play a big benefit, can get a bigger role in this particular matter. So I think RCEP for ASEAN is a very big issue, and we hope to see it concluded in the next few months, and also to show the world that what is multilateral trade is all about.
I see. If I could, Mr. Hassan, a follow-up. Even though one wants to put aside the geopolitics, when a trade and economic community such as RCEP is being discussed, but we are not living in a world with only one issue. So, Mr. Hassan, how do you think economies that are now in discussion about RCEP will be able to sharpen their judgment in terms of what kind of trade and economic environment they want to create, even in a very complicated geopolitical situation right now?
It's true that it's a very complicated world right now. But again, you look what happened to CPTPP, United States, it's too radical. That's the reason why they pull out from TPP, the first TPP. But again, I would say that RCEP shows that, I think, as mentioned before, this is bigger than EU. It's more complicated than USMCA. But again, we can reach to the agreement because there are a lot of give and take here. And I agree with Mr. Banerjee that India has its concern. That's the reason a lot, I think, have to be give and take in this particular issue. And it is a very complicated world. Not to mention with South Korea and Japan, they have their own problem. But RCEP shows that it can be resolved or minimize the conflict.
Mr. Rong, what do you think? Can RCEP be able to proceed even with this very complicated geopolitical situation, there are always, under complicated geopolitical situations, some parties want to take advantage of that. Some parties see it should be as far away from it as possible. Mr. Rong, what do you think?
That's exactly, I think, why we are welcome the RCEP, because the region as a whole has been so complicated, so diverse, and the ongoing geopolitical rivalries, and which is poised or in the risk of dividing or tearing this region apart. Now we have this RCEP, this regional trade bloc. Despite the differences, despite the problems, and we are talking about, then now I think it's going to bring together, integrate together us together, so that we can show, we can work together in the sense that despite the differences, and we still want to work for the and this as a matter of fact, that's exactly, I think, what make the region as a whole being successful. Continued peace, prosperity, and that is exactly, I think, the hope, where the hope is.
Mr. Banerjee, final words, very briefly. We only have 30 seconds left. Mr. Banerjee?
India is positive regarding RCEP. Yes, there are a few issues that need to be resolved, but India remains positive regarding the RCEP. With India's membership, RCEP will be the largest free trade agreement region of the world.
All right.
With enormous potential. India's market will be more open to the rest of the Asian countries, and we look forward to a bright future.
Deepankar Banerjee, Azmi Hassan, and Rong Ying. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your input. Really appreciate it.